but we have really a good number of participants with us now. So welcome to the third session of the HR enrichment certificate. Abu Dhabi University came with this certificate to give support to our community, and HR is one of the core functions. We all deal with HR. There's no way we cannot deal with HR. Even if you are self-employed, you will find a way to look at your visa and stuff related to that. So HR is very critical, and we need to provide that support. So we came with this certificate. The certificate has 6 modules. I'll just share screen and show you those modules, which we need you to be familiar with. I'm just going back to them. If you come to our community portal, community.edu.ac.ie, some of you have seen they already came in and they are registered, and I can see some of you are now live on that community portal. You will get into this banner, you click on it, you will find now those 6 modules. So to get the certificate, you have to attend all the 6 modules. We will give you attendance certificate if you get some of these modules. Believe me, this certificate is very nice, don't miss it. Come to all modules and attend. So this is the 3rd module today, which about diversity in the workplace. We still have 3 more modules, which we will be covering during the coming week. This one will be tomorrow, and the other 2 will be next week. The last module is a reflection module, where we want you to reflect on your experience. So it will be more a discussion. So we'll be sending you a short survey that you need to complete, and based on that one, we will have a discussion together, discussing the experience we went through related to COVID-19 and what are the lessons learned and what we will do next. I think this is important because you have a very valuable people here with experience, with diversity as well, in terms of challenges they face, in terms of the type of organization they run, and learning from this all together, I think will be important. So we're looking forward to see you in all the remaining modules. Once you finish it, you will get the certificate with all modules listed in it and details like that. We will be maybe coming back to you, some of you who filled the registration, or it asks, again, it's our mistake, we did not ask you the right questions. For example, we need to know your organization, so when we give you the certificate, we have your details. So we'll be coming to you with some questions that we will need your help with it. So today our session is about diversity, and we'll have Dr. Ross will help you with this one. Just only one thing I will need to do before we move ahead is today we're using a tool called menti.com. So what you need from your phone, I hope you're watching this presentation on your computer or on a second device like iPad or another phone, whatever. And you have a phone in your hand that you can use. So if that's the case, you can go to menti.com. And once you go to menti.com, it will ask you, it give you a screen like this one. Also, you can do it from your computer. If you open on the browsers and open another window and put menti.com, then you enter this number. So then you will be ready for the activities that will come throughout this session. So you'll be asked some questions, where you give your contribution, and then we will gather it together and we will discuss it. I think you will like it, you will find it hopefully useful as well, and Menti is a nice tool. That's from me. Now it's back to Dr. Ross. He will introduce himself and he will be managing the whole session. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to meet everybody, or meet everybody virtually. I'm Dr. Ross Davidson with the College of Business. And as first of all, I'd like to thank Hamid for basically babysitting me and walking me through using Menti, because one of the things we wanted to do was have more of a chat and discussion to involve you rather than me talk for 60 or 90 minutes on and about diversity in the workplace. And I want to thank Omar as well for, again, shepherding me, helping me have a few dry runs. And so if there's any mistakes, it's now my fault. But anyhow, I look forward. And what's really important is there's the chat down the side that we want to actively engage in. If you have any thoughts, feel free to add a chat, add a comment about whatever the topic is at hand. And as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, if you want to make a verbal comment, feel free to put your hand up and you'll be recognized. Oh, the Menti code 2223817. So, but it's really important that we all engage and share things, because what we're going to do is I'm going to share some ideas on diversity and inclusion. We all know stuff about it. We all have ideas about it. And what's interesting is many of us come from different backgrounds, work in different industries, and it gets played out in many different capacities. Share ideas, and we might learn a few new things together. Most importantly, it's a relaxed situation today, and it's not going to be death by statistics or theories or models. Towards the end of it, I won't be giving you, well, here's how you should run your program, a diversity program of some kind. What it is by the end of it, I'll offer you some key ideas that have been developed at Harvard that are crucial to success with diversity and inclusion programs. But I won't go into a lot of details about how you should set it up, because every organization is unique in so many ways: size, background, support, just to name a few things. But what I do want to convince you of is that diversity and inclusion is a value-added proposition. And what that means is that it's valuable to make your organization more valuable, which has implications for the business, but by being more profitable has implications for everybody's continued growth and development and employment. Now, as I mentioned, add your comments down the side. That's very important. And raise your hand if you'd like to add any further comments. Now, we'll move on beyond registering for Menti. And this is what we're going to do to start with. Looking at those three pictures, what do you see? What do you see? Oh, that's very good, Jola. It's working. That's excellent. Great feedback. It's always nice to know, because I'm somewhat of a technophobe. But look at the three pictures. And with Menti, we want to create a word cloud. What do you see in those three pictures as we start to just enter our first steps into our journey? So just take a minute or two. Okay, gathering, togetherness, happiness, family, tradition, culture, okay, inclusion, okay. Anybody else? Let's add a few more things. Lunch, party, okay. Okay, and we'll just wait another few more people, a few more people, a few more people. Okay. Okay, so what's interesting? Oops, sorry.
So far, 22 gave their inputs.
Okay, no, that's interesting, and it's interesting what you see. Because quite often, when we look at those pictures, because I've done it before, quite often what happens in the group is you see two different views. Some focus in on the differences. As you can see, they're Chinese, they're American or whatever they are, and they're Pakistani. They see that, or they'll see chopsticks, they'll see noodles, they'll see turkey, but they're looking and focusing on differences. What's interesting is how many of you focus in on commonalities, family, festival, gathering, celebration. And it's really important when we're looking at diversity and when we're looking at inclusion, because the two are separate but very important together, is how do we engage with different people? Because a lot of times the diversity is based on very superficial characteristics that research shows that with time can be overcome. As we get to know each other through experience, as we build bridges, as we build knowledge, we build trust. And once we have the foundation of trust, then we can really begin to move forward. So we're just sort of getting ourselves warmed up right now, and we're seeing some chats forming. So that's really good. Keep your comments coming, and the Q&As we'll get to towards the end of the thing. But now, as we start to move and focus more on the UAE, is very interesting how aware we are, and the government is about the role of diversity and cultures plays to be successful within this country. And perhaps helping it focus is the fact that 10 to 15% are Emirati, and the rest of us, myself, comes from Canada, and the rest of us come from around the world. And it's all this, everybody coming together, that is helping to make the UAE in 49 years, a first world nation, which is a remarkable accomplishment, considering when we see the other countries around the world as an example. But Sheik Zayed, interestingly, is very clear. The UAE's cultural diversity drives its economic, its social, its intellectual development, and supporting cultural diversity will bring all members of the community together to promote sustainable development and peace. So we're all in it together, and by working together, embracing each other, we'll be far more successful as a nation, as organizations, and by extension, us as well. And that is interesting to consider that. I just have to, and I'm afraid to, put the chat up. Because, oh, there we are. Excellent. Unable to join Menti. I will have to defer to, and you say unable to join Menti Joy, I will have to defer to the computer experts, Hamid or Omar.
Yeah, I think we already replied to that. I think the code we posted was not right at that time. But now
Okay.
it's 2223817, it should work.
Yeah, 2223817, menti.com. So Sheik Zayed helps us to focus in on what we want, the importance of diversity within this country, and is coming from the highest levels, the recognition and commitment to it. And I think that's very important. And if we move, and as we continue to move forward, Professor Hamid, next slide. What did I, oh, there we are. Now we want to, as we continue to move forward, we want to build the proposition that there's the cultural aspects, there's the macro aspects that we just saw from the highest levels of government, but now let's turn it to the nuts and bolts, to the organizational level, because that's what we're focusing on, HR, organizations, and looking at diversity's dividend and making the case for you and for you to take back to your organizations, either to create programs, expand programs, convince members within the organizations of the value of better engaging in diversity, learning more about it, becoming more adept interculturally, more confident that way. This is very important. This is research from the McKinsey organization, and is 5 years old. But what it clearly shows is that companies that embrace gender, so gender diverse companies, are 15% more likely to outperform their competitors. So they have an advantage over their competitors, and that advantage can translate into the bottom line, into the financial side of it, which is good for the company, and by extension, good for the people within the company, especially in this time of chaos around the world. Oil has dropped to $40 a barrel over the last 5 years, putting real strains on organizations in the country. COVID has created chaos in the country and around the world, upending the economies, putting further strains on organizations. And importantly, culturally diverse companies outperform their competitors by 35%. So we're starting to see a real value for diversity, a hard bottom line value to embracing the concept of diversity, and not just using it as window dressing or a nice word. Next slide, please, Professor Hamid. So as we continue, research from the United States is from 2018. That's the important part. These ideas are based on research. Some is industrial research from McKinsey. Some of this stuff later on is from Harvard. So I tried to find very well-developed sources as well. And what's interesting is 38% of working Americans suggest diversity is a high priority for the company for business reasons, and importantly for ethical reasons, social engagement, and all these other very positive reasons to embrace diversity. But importantly, and unfortunately, the good intentions aren't necessarily translating into employees' real life experiences. And depending on the lens they're looking through, many employees still feel they don't belong. For example, females don't feel respected quite often. Many minorities engaged in the organization still feel underrepresented, pushed to the edges, underpotentiating, and so on. And it's these points. So we've gone from a fairly general, and now we're beginning to enter into the organization. Next slide, please, Professor Hamid. So what are some of the other benefits? On the next slide, there's several benefits that come together to create the overall 15 and 35%. Next slide. And these are interrelated, and that's important to think about. They are individual big benefits, but together they create the 15 or the 35% value added. Diverse cultural perspectives can inspire creativity and drive innovation. That is through people from different countries have different lenses. Miss Joy will see the world through one lens, which leads to a certain level of way of solving problems, which may lead to a certain way of innovating in a solution. Whereas Mazar, I have to apologize, I'm not sure if you're male or female, that's why I say Mazar. Miss Noof, I know, is a female. They look through it through a different lens. They see the world differently. So that can lead to other creativity and innovation through a different perspective. Excuse me. Now, if we bring the three people together, Joy, Mazar, and Noof, 1 + 1 + 1 can now equal 4, or synergy, because we now have a larger toolkit of ideas and skills to draw on, which can drive creativity and innovation. The second point is local market knowledge and insight can make businesses more competitive and more profitable, because the three of you, at least three of you, probably all four of you, come from different backgrounds. You have different expectations about what is necessary in the local market, and the local market you may come from, or even here, within the UAE. We see the markets differently. What's important? What do we need? And that can be a real value added for the organizations to better meet the needs ahead of their competitors. The third point, cultural sensitivity, insight, local knowledge can mean better and higher quality targeted marketing. And that links with number 2. By having a larger, more diverse group, we can be more granular in how we develop marketing strategies, HR strategies, and any other business strategy that we need to better meet a more granular, smaller groups rather than a one-size-fits-all strategy that may only meet 25% of the needs of the people, which can have a benefit as well. Number 4, drawing on culturally diverse talent pools allows organizations to attract and retain the best talent. Now that can occur for several reasons. First of all, if you embrace diversity as an organization, you're not excluding people. So you're able to identify the greatest number of people. For example, for whatever reason, they don't like Canadians, a diverse company excludes Canadians. Well, there may be a super researcher in insulin that you've been excluded. So if we go back to the 1920s, you might have excluded Dr. Banting, the discoverer of insulin. And that's why diversity can help you get the best talent possible and then retain the best talent because there's opportunities. But also, if your company becomes known for this, for inclusion, for diversity, what's important is you become a magnet for people. There's more opportunity for more people. And then it becomes a positive catalyst to move forward. The fifth point is diverse skills base allows an organization to offer a broader, more adaptable range of products and services. And that can fit, as you can see, with point number 3 about marketing. Because with a broader skills base, you can adapt your products more easily and your services more easily because you have a deeper level of understanding of a variety of services you may be delivering, whether you're a butcher delivering different type halal food, or now since the Abraham Accord, I was reading a while ago that the restaurants will now be, in some of the restaurants anyhow, will now be providing kosher food. Now, if you have a larger, more diverse population to draw on, you can better enter into this new emerging business gap. The sixth problem is diverse teams are more productive and perform better for many of the following reasons. Is you have greater creativity, you have a larger toolkit to draw on, and better performance because you can come up with more sophisticated solutions because you have a greater toolkit to draw from. And the final point, point number 7, within a diverse organization, there's greater opportunities for personal and professional growth. As an example, if you're working in the healthcare industry and it turns out you're at the Cleveland Clinic and one of the senior managers is from Cleveland and you're a nurse from the Philippines or a doctor from the Philippines or somewhere else, and you think, you know what, I'd really like to move to the United States for a position, you're able to grow and develop the necessary networks that may help you achieve your dream. So it can help you personally, but also professionally, because you get to learn some of the most advanced medical techniques in this case from the doctors from the United States or different techniques from other parts of the world, whatever those other techniques and doctors may bring, because there's new ideas being developed all the time, and that helps. And what works in one place may not be known in another place. And that is, again, 1 + 1 = 3. And these are the benefits that come together to help build the 15 or 35% advantage. Next slide, please, Professor Hamid.
There is one
Oh, go
comment.
ahead.
There's one comment on the chat from North. She's saying, I think it also makes us more engaging and confident.
Okay, that's interesting, Noof. Would you like to build on that? Because that's a really interesting point, and it's a really important point. But I'd like to hear, or type it in.
And I'll give her a chance to speak. No, if you need to unmute your microphone and you can speak.
All right. So hi, Doctor. Hi, Professor Hamad.
Thank you.
What I was talking about is that how it makes us more engaging is that we are more confident to speak to other people, and at the same time we learn how to accept others, and we accept the difference in lifestyles and behavior between us and other communities. Like us in the UAE, like at the beginning of our times, we were very closed, but now we are accepting everything, and we are accepting the different lifestyles, and we are also beginning to be like them. Like we share everything together. Like we no longer not respect the values and culture and customs. We accept that every home is different, every society is different, and we're sophisticated to teach our children that we cultivate in them the idea of acceptance and how to be confident and accept other people's values. So that's how I explain by being more confident. We speak to other people and we listen to them and we just accept them the way they are, and we are just more interested to learn and see how we are all one community at the end of the day.
No, and you're absolutely right, and that's a very, very important point that you're making is, and that this fits into, well, all the points, but particularly point number 7 and point number 4 about talent.
Yes.
Because you can, as you grow your confidence, as you engage more with other people, you can see the confidence build. And I see it in my classes quite often, amongst some women in particular that are older, returning to university, very unconfident lacking in confidence at the start, but by the end of it, when they do very well, by engaging with other people, men, women, younger people that have seen the world differently, just like younger people in the rest of the world, and they're able to fit in, embrace the ideas, be accepted, share ideas with myself, because I learn more from yourselves, but it builds all of everybody's confidence. And that's an incredibly important point by being able to engage like that. That's such an important point.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
We can move on, please. Oh yeah, there we are. So anyhow, as we move on and we continue, what is diversity? We all have ideas what diversity is. And of course, we always, because it's a presentation and I'm a professor, we have to have a few definitions. But I'd like from you to get your thoughts on what is diversity and also what is inclusion. Anybody?
Yeah. So you can put it in the chat, or maybe
yeah, you can,
raise your hand to speak about it.
Anybody?
Next time we'll put it in Menti.
Anybody? This is going to be like an auction. Anybody? Anybody?
Yeah.
Anybody? Next slide.
There are many. You have one here.
No,
Julie wanted to speak.
go ahead.
Just unmute your microphone and talk.
Yes, hi, Doctor. Well, actually, diversity is when certain range of people from different societies, from different cultural backgrounds, from different genders get together for a certain purpose.
Okay. No,
So
that's good. Okay. Okay. Would anybody like to add more to that? Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a good start. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Doctor. It could be also the simple stuff. It could be difference in our ages, in our genders, in our beliefs or religion. It could be in any kind of diversity. Like our beliefs in general, the political beliefs, our hobbies. It could be any kind of diversity, like everything that's different from others.
Okay, no, and that's good. Now let's just move on and shape it up into something a little bit more formal.
Yeah.
So, true diversity, and it's important to focus on the word true diversity, because we have the basic building blocks. True diversity is having people from all kinds of backgrounds and identities at every level of your organization. So it means making a conscious effort to diversify teams and management in addition to overall numbers, because quite often we're a very diverse organization, but the people, for example, gender, they become relegated to the ones that you see in certain positions. Or you think about diversity, gender diversity in the various militaries, whether the UAE, Canada, Britain, originally women coming into the Air Force and Army, they would be relegated to the clerical type of positions, your secretaries and all those types of things. But true diversity means they fit in anywhere within the organization. And you come from a variety of different backgrounds. Now, but it's really important to think about is across all the levels, including people from all backgrounds. Next slide, please. So inclusion builds on that, and inclusion is the next step. So we have lots of people from different backgrounds across the organizations. Yeah, keep your comments coming. They're really good. Now, it's also important not just to have them there. See, we're a very diverse organization. You have the pictures on your brochures, you have all the other things, your statistics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But inclusion is the next step, and is very, very important. Diversity is about variety. Inclusion is having a solid foundation for supporting employees and their different needs. Inclusion requires a culture, an organizational culture where employees feel welcome, respected, and empowered to grow. And even the most diverse companies can't be successful without inclusion. So if we think about adding the second part, we think about I should have had the slide, the previous work team with the fellow in the wheelchair. And if you're creating a forensic auditing team and the wheelchair is of no value or no concern, you're interested in that person's brain and ability to be part of that team to pick apart whatever set of books it is for malfeasance, for embezzlement, for misbehavior. Or you think about what is inclusion, and returning to the military example, the Army and Air Force, whereas previously women would join the Army or the Air Force and be relegated to the desk jobs, the secretarial type jobs, things of that nature. Now we think about it, inclusion means welcoming, respecting, empowering people to grow. And we think about the UAE Air Force and the female combat fighter pilot as an example of how this country is embracing diversity and inclusion in a meaningful way. And that's important to think about and to recognize the difference. Yep, that's right. Next slide. But of course, there's the positive. But what I'm interested in now from yourselves, you can either talk or type, is yourselves, what are some of the issues you either face personally or you see at your organization in trying to have effective diversity programs? You may have a top-notch diversity program, and we want to hear about those in a few minutes as well. But what would be some of either your personal issues you may face, or as I said, some of the issues you face in trying to run effective diversity programs? Because now we're transitioning from here's why you should do it here's what we mean. Now we have to start deconstructing some of the issues. Managers discrimination. Okay. Would you like to expand on that, Abdul Rahman or Hannah?
Yeah,
Okay.
Abdurrahman he already raised his hand, so I'll give him a chance to speak.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just faced one of the issues I faced is like discrimination. It's to discriminate between black and white, like in America or some countries.
Okay. Okay. No, you're right. And these are pernicious things that exist everywhere. And I go back to the picture of the person in the wheelchair. Whatever you're trying to do, that's irrelevant. But the good part is, based on a lot of research, is that this is surface level. These are surface level characteristics. And with time, with interaction, bridges can be built, trust can be built, and with effort, but not too much effort, you can overcome them as you build the bonds of trust and knowledge and move forward together. You become focused on commonalities.
Yeah, there are a few more things in the chat. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I see that. Often women don't get recognized and to be hired in higher managerial positions, or people from certain countries only. Okay. Would you like to add to that, Laura? Okay. Most common corporate discrimination in salary ranges. Okay, Mark. Agree with the above. Okay, Karen. Okay, so there's some interesting characteristics here that seem to be maybe not unique, but some interesting characteristics that are starting to be highlighted. Women have particular issues in and around childcare and extra duties and things of that nature. And that's an ongoing theme that's around the world, global. Then there's corporate discrimination and issues in and around salary. And some of these, remember, to go from point A to point B, inclusion, equality, and these types of things takes time. Salary differences based on nationalities. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, these are all interesting issues and fair issues that get serviced quite regularly. But that's good. Now we're starting to see what some of the issues are, and we'll look at some of the issues from research that have appeared that are quite common, and you offer some interesting ones as well. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Hamid.
Sir, I have just one. Muhammad Ashik, I will let you speak next time.
Oh, okay. Did you want to speak now or later?
Yeah, he raised his hand. Do you want to?
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. Okay. You need just to unmute Muhammad.
Okay.
Great.
Go ahead, Hamid. Or
Yeah,
we'll move on.
You're not hearing him well. I think there's an issue with his microphone.
Okay. Well, we'll move on. These are interesting comments coming forth. That's an interesting one, Kuala. That's an interesting one. And again, that's something that comes up quite regularly in Canada as well. My sister used to say that all the time, and she became an assistant deputy minister back home in the province of Manitoba, where I come from. So there's always hope. Oh, that's interesting, Mustafa. Employees who don't accept change. Okay. So there's some really interesting issues that you're surfacing above and beyond the 6 big issues. Colleagues from some cultures may be less likely to let their voices be heard. That's a big issue in the context of diversity and inclusion. And many people, depending on the culture, they're raised from the time they're young to be more submissive, to not have voice. Whereas in other cultures, over time, they've learned to have voice. And what's interesting is some of it based on cultural theory, various cultural theories in management, such as, you may or may not be familiar with them, such as Hofstede cultural intelligence. That part is secondary, but there's a concept called, there's a concept called power distance. And what that means is some cultures, the power distance is what's considered very big. And that's where the leaders and the employees, the followers, the other group members, the gap is really big, where the leaders, they say what should be done, they provide the information, but there's very little room for the group members to have voice, to share their ideas with the leader. So the communication becomes one way, and that can impede people from speaking up. Whereas in other cultures, the gap, the power distance is very small. And what that means, a country like United States would be the people at the front lines, the members, have more input into what the leader or the person in charge has to say. And that can be very important. So you might think of China as a large power gap, power distance. UAE, according to these series, has a large power distance. So if you move that forward on an individual level, that can be an issue for some of you personally. But if you look at it in the context of an organization and creating groups, if there's an American working with perhaps an Emirati, that can be very stressful as well. Whereas one, if the Emirati is in charge, might find it very stressful, annoying, or otherwise, if in fact the American group member is always wanting to input or have input into the decision-making process. Whereas if the American is in charge and the Emirati is just part of the group, it might be very frustrating for the Emirati to be expected to have input. Some might find it very liberating, others might find it very stressful. But if you look at, or if you consider it, because it's like two ships passing by, it can be extremely difficult and create big issues in the context of creating an effective, diverse working groups that are inclusive. Because as we'll see in a few minutes, like attract like. The second point is integration across multicultural teams can be difficult in the face of prejudice or negative cultural stereotypes, as we may or may not be aware of. For example, in Canada, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, in Canada, the French live in one part of the country, the English live in pretty much the rest of the country. And at that point, there was a real movement by the French to separate from Canada. At one point, they wanted to become their own country. And what that led to, because they still work for the governments and everything else, a lot of negative cultural stereotypes. You might not think about that of Canada, but this was part of a growing pain we went through as a nation. But there's prejudices, French versus English. In Quebec, it was very hard at points for English-speaking people or English names to get hired, and vice versa in the West. There was negative cultural stereotypes based basically on language issues and a few other issues. A second quick example would be in the United Kingdom. There's a group of people called travelers, and they don't belong to one community. As the word implies, they travel along on a schedule somehow, their families in trailers, and then they'll stop for a while. And the kids don't go to a normal school because they aren't rooted in a community. But the teachers will come out and teach them. But when they arrive, there's a lot of negative cultural stereotypes all the time, whether they're there or not. And they face a lot of prejudice in many cases. And they go to the grocery stores, go to the hospital, whatever other services it may be. And these types of things, we have to integrate these in some capacity. Professional communication can be misrepresented or difficult to understand across languages and cultures, as you're aware. Point number 3, again, accents, we're all aware of that. We have an interesting cross-cultural mix of people here. So, and what's interesting, just based on myself, I've been told actually, and it was by somebody that specializes in languages, is that Canadians tend to speak very fast. I'm not sure it's because we have a lot to say, but Canadians tend to speak very fast. And because of that, it can be very hard for people to understand. And I regularly start slow and ask my students to tell me to slow down, and they never do because they're polite. Or you think about, that's just one accent, or all the various accents can be a real issue. But also the meaning of words. And I'm using it in the English context because that's the language I'm familiar with. But the meaning of words can be very, very problematic and very confusing, because as you're aware in English, some words can have more than one meaning and very different meanings. And that can lead to real problems to be understanding and to co-create understanding between groups. And if there's no ability to co-create understanding, that can be hard to communicate properly, which can lead to groups pulling apart because of the stressors. The fourth part, and most would be familiar with, or many, is the visa requirements, the employment laws, and the cost of accommodating workplace requirements can be a really big, another big issue in developing effective, diverse organizations. We think about the visas. Do we have the necessary credentials? Will they be recognized in this country? As an example of visa requirements, will we be allowed to come because we're not married, but we've been living together for 5 years, as an example? Well, as of last week or the week before, the answer would be yes. Previously, the answer would probably be no, because they weren't married, and that was part of your legal system. And does that affect employment laws? Maybe, maybe not. But also accommodating workplace requirements can be difficult. There's been big issues in the West. For example, at Mercedes-Benz in the United Kingdom, a woman I know that worked there, she was a health and safety officer. She was really miffed and worked up at one point because they had taken one of her rooms or offices from her to turn it into a prayer room, because they had hired a lot of Muslims during that period in the recent past, and they requested that as part of the employment and other things, and so that's what they did. And she was really miffed and upset for a variety of reasons. Some because of just who she was and her worldviews, but also by taking away that space affected her identity as the health and safety, whatever rank she was, because she had all this space and part of it was removed, and she gained identity through that, partly through that space. So these types of things we have to think about. And the fifth point can be understanding professional etiquette. That can be a big issue in creating diverse organizations. As an example, when I first came here, I was lucky. I met a colleague named Natalie Tofflis. Now, she was an Egyptian Canadian, and she'd grown up in Canada, but she was the first woman, Arabic woman I met. And as you would do in Canada, I put my hand out to shake her hand, and she said, no, 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 you don't do that. Now, I was lucky because she was gracious enough to explain it to me, because she recognized where I was coming from and unfamiliar. So we want to think about these types of professional etiquettes as well, because they can create a lot of issues within the organizations. Why won't you shake my hand? Are you too good for me? Am I beneath you? Or however it might be. And the final thing, point number 6, is different or conflicting styles of work across teams. there's a cultural theory developed by Hall. Again, some of you may be familiar, some of you may not. But what he said, and it goes back to the 50s, what he suggests is that there's some countries whose cultures are considered high context. Other cultures are considered low context countries. And what that means is countries that have high context cultures, their relationships within work groups, within negotiations is based on relationships. So they spend a lot of time, not necessarily on the work itself originally, but getting to know each other, building up trust, building up confidence, these types of things. It's about relationships. The UAE, China are two examples. Now, a low context culture would be a culture where time is money. Let's just get to it. We have the legal infrastructures that lay out the bulwark for honest agreements. So we don't, and that's where the trust comes from. I want to buy X from you, and you will provide it. So if you imagine those two different cultures working together, it can be really problematic. One group just wants to get on with whatever the task is at hand. The other person or people in the group, they want to understand the people in the group to create a unified whole. So we can see how, again, that factors into understanding diversity and inclusion. Now, what's interesting is, as well as we move forward, I switched gears from culture in the context of diversity just briefly to talk briefly about gender, because gender it also fits in actually with culture, because under the context, there's a female culture and a male culture in many aspects. Men see the world one way, behave one way. Women see the world one way, behave one way, which creates two unique situations. Now, there's an interesting article that's been uploaded from McKinsey, and it's one of the few studies I've ever been able to find that specifically looks in this region. And that's why I want to talk about it very briefly before we come to this. We're coming to that slide, because what ends up happening is, in the context of leadership, what ends up happening is women and men enact leadership differently. What's important to both groups is different. So in the context of diversity and inclusion, it's important to understand that and to co-create an understanding of a leadership team that works and works effectively. For example, based on this research, females in the GCC, they're far more committed to participative decision-making in the context of leadership. They're more focused on the communication process. They have to be for a participative decision process, which means they're focused far more on the people, on the relationships. Whereas men, they're far more focused on individual decision-making. I'll make the decision on away we go. Action, action, action. They're far more action-oriented. And it becomes interesting to think about, how do you co-create a shared leadership understanding that is effective? And this fits with the same idea of a shared co-created understanding cross-culturally. Now, building on that, and as a transition to this slide that's coming up, is research by a person named Klein at the Wharton School of Business in the United States. Look specifically in the context of gender and programs to promote women to the highest levels. And something that was raised by several of you in the chat, which is interesting, and you may find it very interesting. This article as well is up on the website for you to read. But what was interesting is they had these large companies had programs to develop women so that they would be able to be promoted up to the highest levels, managing directors, board members, things of that nature, the very highest levels in the very largest corporations. Now, what made it interesting was, it wasn't so much about gender in the context of culture and in the context of diversity that was interesting. But what was interesting were all the biases that entered into who or how these women were identified and being promoted. And it's important, and this is the transition point, is the unconscious biases that were being made to promote these, to identify and promote these women. It wasn't, they were women in the program, all right, but that was a secondary factor. The people that were being entered into the program, they shared the same backgrounds as the male mentors, as the male mentors. They all went to the same Ivy League schools, or the small cluster of schools, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, whatever it might be. They all had other similar background patterns. They were all the same religion. They were all the same. Their parents had the same legacies, the same golf courses. They belonged to the same social clubs, the same political organizations, all these things. And it was all these, really, the unconscious biases that they were building their decisions on. And that becomes important in the context of creating effective, inclusive work groups. And that's why I talked briefly about the switch to gender. Now, these are the 4 key biases in the context, and there's a lot more. Research has suggested through salami slicing, approximately 157 different biases. Now, but these ones are critical in the context of diversity and understanding diversity and inclusion. And then there's in-group biases and out-group biases and confirmation biases. Now, what's interesting about the biases is they've arrived at similar points from looking at leadership research through the leader-member exchange theory. And what that suggests is leaders bring in groups, and then there's out groups within a team or an organization. And in an ideal world, the in-group matches and is selected that would best form a team to solve a problem. But what happens quite regularly is that in-group ossifies, remains constant, because as they study these in-groups research, what they found is that they ossify because the bridges get built and the networks get built, and they're based on commonalities, same experiences, friendships, same universities, same engineering school, same accounting school, or some other factors that may not be relevant, but they stay there. And what that does is that excludes, or they're all from the same religious background, they're all from the same cultural group, as an example. So that can lead to favoritism as an in-group bias. You favor people that are similar, so you all come together. But also, from a more sociological perspective, Tadgefeld and Turner, looking at children, yes, children that you send to summer camps in places like Canada and the United States, because the parents wanted a holiday. The summer camps was where kids could go canoeing and camping and do all these exciting outdoor things. But what they found out was at the end of their camp, they would have a fake battle. 2 teams steal the other team's flag. And what they found, though, is to make the numbers the same, the teams would form up, but as soon as they had to move a person to the other team, that team member would suddenly switch sides and see who their in-group was and who became the out-group. So they were very perceptive. Then they noticed on a smaller version that just changing, making 2 teams, just changing the t-shirt color, 2 teams, and the one that changed teams immediately started to form bonds and create an in-group, out-group bias. And you favored your own group. And then they continued on and right down to things as the smallest crests. So if we think about that, and a good example for this community is, as sometime shortly, the derby will come up, the football derby or soccer, depending on your country, between Manchester City, baby blue, Manchester United, red, and those are profound, powerful anchors which create in-group and out-group biases, favoritism, and which can lead to stereotyping as well, which is an out-group bias. Now, we're familiar with some of these other terms. Stereotyping is you give a negative or positive thought about a group different from yourself. We see when we're younger kids in the West, at school, there'd be the ones with the really long hair and the really loud music. They were one group. They're the sports people, the jocks were another group. And we stereotype them. Oh, they're the jocks. They just play basketball, soccer, football, golf, whatever sports it is. They're stupid. That's all they do. The other group, well, not the rock and roll group. The other group, third group, they're the ones that study. But we're also familiar with the outgroup concept of prejudice. And that's where an individual or group is viewed in a negative way. And we're familiar with that. The final one, which is very, very important and can overlay all of these and a whole bunch of other decisions we always make that we may or may not be familiar with. And we're looking at it in the context of diversity, but it can also lead to very poor decisions throughout your organizations or throughout your life. I doubt you make bad life decisions. But what confirmation bias says, and it's based on a lot of research, and what it suggests is that we privilege or weight or give greater weight to information that agrees with our worldview on some topic, that agrees with our beliefs, agrees with our theories about whatever the topic may be. But what we also do is we discount information or knowledge that challenges our worldview. And that's very important to think about, because that can be the key that picks the lock to better understanding ourselves and outgroups and in-groups and prejudice and stereotypes and favoritism and all these other potentially pernicious habits, unconscious biases. And we all have a bias of some sort. We like to think we don't, but we all have a bias of some sort. Now, if you'll play the video, please, Hamid. I've talked for enough.
Yeah, there is just only one participant. Karina would like to.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, Karina, unmute and please make your comments. If you still want to make that, maybe
Karina?
She
Karina?
changed her mind. Yeah, I think she changed her mind.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move to the video.
Okay, it's a short 3-minute video that's very important about.
New research from the fields of neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our behaviors and decisions? Unconscious biases are simply our unintended people preferences. They are formed by our socialization, our personal experiences, and the representations of different groups in the media. These experiences act as social filters in which we make assessments and judgments of people around us. Research tells us that human beings have a natural tendency to place individuals into social categories. These categories are often based on visual cues such as gender, cultural background, age, height, or body size. We also categorize based on social background, job roles, religious identity, or political affiliation. The unconscious brain uses associations based on social categories to develop biases. For example, if we are constantly exposed to women as primary school teachers or receptionists, or men as plumbers and organizational leaders, these associations become wired within the human brain. The unconscious brain uses social categories to make unconscious judgments about people who are similar to us and people who are different from us. A common form of unconscious bias is affinity bias. This type of bias impacts talent processes in organizational decision-making, including how we recruit. Managers are more likely to hire people who look similar or with sounding names to them. Work allocation. Managers are more likely to assign key client projects to individuals within their teams who they have an unconscious affinity with. Performance. Where there is some kind of affinity, managers are more likely to spend time informally discussing positive contributions to the team and will focus on development and future work plans. For those where there is little affinity, managers are more likely to question past performance. The conversation will be less friendly and even hostile at times. Unconscious bias often results in a set of micro-behaviors. Examples of positive micro-behaviors include supporting the ideas of someone with who you have an unconscious affinity whilst in a team meeting, or simply wanting to have coffee with someone like you. Examples of negative micro-behaviors include checking emails on your phone whilst talking to a colleague or cutting someone off in a meeting. Often our intention is not to make biased decisions, and through a focus on conscious thinking and by creating inclusive work cultures, we can learn to control our unconscious judgments and mitigate the impact of bias on our talent programs. For more information on the nature of unconscious bias and how to mitigate its effects, contact ENEI, www.enei.org.uk, info@enei.org.uk, telephone 0207 922 7790.
Okay. And to anybody, any thoughts on that video? Perhaps
you can also use your thumb to say if you like it or don't like it.
Oh, okay.
If you want, but just I think tell us about what you think.
Because it's really important to think about that. And we can think about, maybe you've been in the situation either as a recipient or as a part of a group, and you didn't even think about it, where a new person comes to work and your established group is going off to lunch and you don't bother to invite them. That's very isolating. It's very isolating. And some of these things we would have thought or not paid that much attention to, or that we would have thought about previously as just good graces, how you should behave to be polite and all these things. But it's important to remind ourselves, because they can have an incredibly drip, 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 drip negative effect if we're not careful. Okay, we'll continue to move on. Keep your thoughts coming because they're very important. They're very, very important. And as Professor, yes. So anyhow, as we continue to move forward, so we've looked at, as we make a case of why inclusion has a value, what it is, some of the issues. Now let's start thinking about, how do you manage diversity and inclusion? Because one thing I can't do and won't do in this session is, here's a diversity course for you. Have a nice day. Because you all come from different backgrounds, different organizations, so on and so forth. And what works for perhaps Huda may be completely irrelevant for Noof, because you're in different organizations, different sizes, different support. You might just be here for interest as well. So do you have any ideas or thoughts about how do you manage diversity and inclusion in your organization? Perhaps you're directly involved. Perhaps you're on the receiving end of some of it. But we just want to start shaping out what actually goes on with you people. I work for engineering, okay. Okay, that's interesting, Shitra. A very good point, Mark. Very good point. Okay, okay, that's interesting what you say, Christian. We incorporate it into the company's policies and strategies. That's very good. Only one problem. In a lot of cases, the policy and strategies, they're there. We all know there are all these policies and strategies. We all have manual after manual after manual, but quite often policies drift, people drift, people get forgotten. And it can be very important. Speaking different, okay, you find that's an interesting point about languages. Okay. Okay, setting clear goals for members. That's interesting. Keep them coming because I better double check with Professor Hammond. I believe you have access to the chat afterwards. Is that correct, Professor
Yes,
Hammond?
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, because you guys are coming up with the ideas so fast, but keep them coming because you're sharing interesting ideas about how do we make a very effective workforce. And when we think about earlier, some of the issues you were saying, centering around, perhaps, there was the big six, but then some of the other ones you personally felt, such as in and around money, or if you're a female, in and around not being taken seriously or recognized for the extra duties you may have to do in the context of childcare. We want to be thinking about that as a manager. Okay, all your team members. Okay. Okay. Well, keep your ideas coming and share with each other too. And I won't say be controversial, but next slide, please, Professor Hammond.
Yeah.
Those are really good ideas. Really good. So now we want to move on. I'm going to give you 5 suggestions based on recent research, fairly recent research, 2018 or 19, I forget which year it was, 2018. That are critical to include within a program. Is not all the nuts and bolts details, but just 5 points that we really have to think about in creating an effective workplace diversity program. And the first point is, and it's based on a lot of research, unfortunately, most workplace diversity programs fail. They don't work very well. And in some cases, it may actually increase bias amongst individuals by creating an us versus them mindset. Because, and that's very important to think about. Obviously, the messages and the communication is going haywire somewhere. You're communicating the message, but it's being translated and interpreted differently somehow. So we want to really think about the communication of the message that we're trying to bring forward about the importance of diversity within the organization. And some may be, when it gets translated, diversity program to bring women to the highest levels of the organization, us versus them. I had my site as a male up and coming chartered accountant with an MBA from Harvard, so on and so forth, going that route. And that is part of the reason of how us versus them may handle it. Point number 2 is a lot of programs focus on slides like the movie that we just had on bias reduction. Okay, we know about some of these biases, stereotypes, prejudice, and then we'll have different exercises, videos, other activities suitable to your program, but that's where it stops. But what's interesting is, again, quite often, these types of programs can actually increase hostilities. And though, because people sometimes, again, translate the purposes wrong. Again, it becomes an us versus them. And those that actively participate, they've found, quite often become those that have already embraced the idea that are pro-diversity. So you're selecting into different groups. So that can create real hostility as well, if depending where you're focusing or not focusing and communicating the messages necessary. That's a very good point, Dr. Huda. Next, please. Here we are. Quite often, and I saw that in comments earlier as well, many of the programs, they focus on the managers with the idea that the managers will police it, or they'll continue the program out as necessary, but it regularly breaks down. And the solution, I don't offer too many solutions. One solution, though, is to invite non-managers to participate as well, to foster communication, to build bridges of trust and understanding. And then people within that group can help percolate out the ideas in and around diversity and inclusion that you're trying to instill effectively within your organization. Because even within organizations, a lot of times there's the work group, the supervisors, the managers, and diversity is coming this way, but there's not a sense of inclusion in the process. But also by including non-managers, we know organizations have the formal networks and leadership structures. However, there's also the informal networks and leaders within the organization. And by bringing and identifying some of them, you can better bring them on board, identify the resistance points, but also the champion points to help get your programs going to where you want them to be by bringing the necessary informal leaders on board where possible. Next point, please. This is very important. Well, the other points are important as well, and I can't count, obviously, but it's about keeping the focus on the workplace issues, because quite often it will degenerate into personal issues. And if there's a discussion or a disagreement, you want it to be focused on the outcome, what are we trying to achieve, or the process to achieve that outcome. And it requires a lot of skill, because a lot of research shows that in fact, what can happen very easily is it can slide sideways and it becomes a personal issue instead of focusing on what's important and what you're trying to achieve. And part of that becomes because personal issues and career are inevitably intertwined. And the lack of diversity and inclusion in workplaces can also be due to personal decisions or other non-work factors. So the purpose of the second paragraph is to also recognize that some people are very blasé about it. So we have to recognize that as well, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're an impediment of some kind. Next slide, please. So one of the things is to keep the conversations going, to stay accountable. So you have been doing work on diversity. You've had think you're having a very successful program, integrate or bringing diversity through your organization. But like a lot of things, it requires an ongoing conversation, ongoing reinforcement, positive reinforcement. And just like anything, just like trying to lose weight or exercise, you need the ongoing conversation. But in the industrial discussion is researchers such as Snook, although in the context of safety and health, recognize that a lot of, over time, even with the best of intentions, people slide sideways. They get careless. They drift. Drift is the more appropriate word. So you want to keep these conversations going on and on and on. And research shows that the most successful programs are the ones where you have continued engagement, where you have mentors in particular, coaches in particular, to help bring and develop champions on an ongoing basis to drive your program forward. Perhaps the informal leaders are identified, and there's a couple other types and groups of people you can think about. And the next point, please. So the next point and the final point is, because like I said, you're not getting a huge program, is your programs and you have to be flexible when you're creating a program of some kind and in bringing diversity and inclusion into the workplace, because it is both. Because remember, inclusion is diversity with meaning. meaningful diversity, but both content and flexible in content and delivery, because different organizations, different industries have different ways of doing things, different cultures, different age groups might be effective. So there is no one size fits all. And that's why it's always a tricky decision whether to develop a program in-house. Do you have the resources, the people with knowledge, or the skills, or the time, or the money, or some other resources, support from senior management, or are you going to bring in something from outside, something off the shelf, a consultant, some other variation on that, because you can have a program ready to go and away you go, but it might be a canned program off the shelf, where it is essentially a one size fits all with some tweaking. So you want to be very, very thoughtful about putting your program together. Next slide, please. So because of time constraints, it's 5:50, and this survey by PwC, I encourage you to do. It takes about 15 minutes. It takes about 15 minutes. And what I would encourage is you to do it, because that allows you to benchmark you and your company to see where you are in relation to other companies. And they're trying to make it global. And it also allows you to do it by industry as well.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat.
Oh, okay, good. Good. So because of time, we'll move on, because, or you can download everything from the Q code. Professor Hamid, he can better explain that to you.
Yeah, just using your phone, if you just point your phone to this one with your camera on, it will take you to the same address.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the address is in the chat as well.
Okay, great. And then what SHRM is, it's a Society for Human Resource Management. Some of you may be familiar, some of you may not. That's the American version of the CIPD, which is the British equivalent. Now, and this is SurveyMonkey. They have a pre-made survey, but if you want statistics developed, you'll have to do it yourself. SurveyMonkey here has, from a start to finish, work along process to help you develop a diversity survey and the future statistics that you want to run on it, to see where you are in the process. So I include some useful tools. So again, I remind you and encourage you why diversity and inclusion is important, because it will help make your, by being gender diverse, 15% more effective, cross-cultural diversity, 35% more effective than your competitors. That translates to the bottom line. Translating to the bottom line helps the company, and that helps you and your colleagues. Final slide, please. So, thank you. And again, what do you see? It's the Inuit or the Eskimo, it's the Emirati, it's the Maori, all showing signs of friendship. So let's conclude with a
SurveyMonkey with Mentimeter.
With a word cloud, I believe it is. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. You need to go to mentimeter.com.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then enter the same code. Then you can use your phone.
Right. And so let's conclude. What do you see? What is diversity?
Okay. I think people are doing it, but it's not maybe showing
Okay,
the
that's helpful.
result. Yeah, we'll see the result now. Now, if show the results, yeah.
Oops, I think we probably might have needed one more slide.
Yeah, do you have one more slide? No, this is
No.
the slide.
No, this
Yeah.
is the last one. So, but that's all right.
Yeah, we are done. There are 3 questions here if you, and the Q&A, if you want to go through them quickly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you can bring them up. I'm not sure I can answer them, but I'll try.
Yeah, can you click on the Q&A and look at it?
Oh, yes, I can. I'm so used to just being spoon-fed. Okay. May I know more about power, distance? Any references, please? If you go to Hofstede, HOFSTEDE.com, you'll come up to his website and he will explain all 5 dimensions. I only talked about 1. There's actually 6 dimensions now, but I'm not going into a series beyond the scope of this course. Now, he does a nice explanation of power, distance, and other dimensions that form, that all the countries are measured on to create a cultural map. And what you can look at, Mark, is your country, oh, there's the picture, versus UAE versus Canada, and you'll see different profiles. And then you can start to see, in the context of what we've been discussing and other contexts, how difficult life can become when we're talking about work and all these other types of issues.
You have a question from Nov as well?
Yeah, I'm reading it right now. When it
Okay.
comes to inclusion or putting people in groups, how do we exactly, people from different backgrounds, know that we value their ideas? I think we still struggle. That's a very interesting question, Nuv. Very interesting. Some of the ways are through experience, through time. Small things, having open, building bridges, it takes time. Being interested in each other, wanting to learn about each other, both on the job stuff, but also more informally, because you do have to build bridges in and around trust to find out about their lives and about other things. As an example, and it's a very good question. Once you have trust, then you can start having more open conversations. It takes time. That's one of the big issues. It takes time, but the parties have to want to. It's not just you, but the other parties have to want to engage as well. But if you're open and inviting people, most people, not all, but most people will come around. I'd like to say there's a more grander answer, but sometimes that's where you have to start. If you're trying to move at a different level, then right, we have to work together. We have a little bit of superficial training, such as you're from a high power distance, I'm from a low power distance, but that can be a good starting point for a discussion. Or if it's at some point within your organization, different types of ice-breaking games, they're called ice-breaking games, where in fact, these types of things get brought up in a more structured way to be identified, and games in and around it, how you make decisions or other aspects, that can be very effective as well. What is the difference between that and between what and stereotyping? I think you're missing a word.
Yeah, I think the question was when you were explaining, I think something, I'm not sure what was that. And at that time, the question came. So we missed the context.
Oh.
Yeah, I can ask the question again.
Okay.
If you look at the word cloud now, it's forming there.
Yeah, I see that.
Respect.
Right. I'm reading Karina's question. We're international. received a comment from one of my employees saying the company do not put any effort to understand employees' culture. How can we ensure as a team to make individuals feel welcome and recognized as individuals? Well, that's again, that's an interesting question. You can start by talking. Some of these things sound so incredibly simple, but having Christmas example. Christmas is coming, and it doesn't have to be at Christmas, but it becomes an interesting winter festival time, because it's not just Christmas. Actually, a lot of other, it's actually started as a winter solstice. A lot of other cultures have festivals as well, by having, even at your company, what do they call them? Like a potluck, where I don't know how big your company is, international, but I don't know how big a group you're talking about. But you can start with your own small work group, like your own small department, like a potluck, where people from different cultures bring and share food. Because it's amazing how, like the first pictures, how food has seems to have almost a magical capacity in many ways of sharing. And we think about it because it gives us something to talk about, to start a conversation, to start walking across the bridge to build trust. And you think about it from a variety of different cultures. We have, if you're from Russia or Poland, we have what's called a pierogi, which is usually potato or some sort of meat wrapped in a dough of some kind. Then you go to another part of the world, China, you have a dumpling, which is, actually they do make with potato, but it's got some sort of meat in it, wrapped in some sort of dough and cooked. So essentially it's the same type of food around the world, but you have an interesting conversation around, you can start to have an interesting conversation by that, and it helps people relax as well, because food has that capacity. That would be one simple way. Can I repeat? Oh, the website address.
You may put it in the chat if that is possible.
Well, I was going to. That's what I was going to do. Is, if I can remember it exactly. Yeah, there we are.
It's good.
Yeah.
I'll share it with everyone.
Yeah, and if somebody tries it, and if there's a problem with it, I'll have to look it up for you and send it back to you.
Sure. I'm just pasting it for everyone now. Okay, I think we're done.
Well, anyhow, what I would like to say is, first of all, a great big thanks to my wingmen and roadie, Hamid and Omar. And I'd also like to say it's been enjoyable, all your feedback and not feedback, but input and sharing of ideas. It's been really a really great experience. And finally, I hope to see you in a class in the spring to continue our education journey together. This is a sampler of far more exciting things that we do in class. So anyhow, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you tomorrow for the next session. Have a good time.